Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. All right, we are grateful to have with us on today Mrs. Nona Jones. Good afternoon, Miss Jones, Miss
Good
Nona.
afternoon.
It is good to have you with us here on Church Unfiltered. Good to have you with us, despite all that's happening in the world. And we are all homebound right now, but thank God we have technology, of course, to be able to connect.
Yes, yeah, we are in a very, very strange season, but thank God he's made provision.
Good. And I know that you have an extensive schedule. How has that impacted everything that you've been doing as far
You
as
know
this?
what? So here's what's funny. I've talked to several people who similarly did a lot of travel, did a lot of speaking, and everyone's engagements were canceled because people aren't having events. And so I've had people tell me, "Oh, I'm just resting and just
Mhm.
recuperating." And I'm like, that has not been my experience at all. Like I'm
Right,
going to sleep later and later, waking
right.
up earlier and earlier. But it's all for good reason. I think God has placed me in a role where the church needs support, and so that's what I'm here to do.
Right, right. And definitely, yeah, I've been busier since all of this took place. I didn't realize I could be busier, but I
Lord,
am. I am.
yep.
Well, I want to give a formal introduction of Miss Nona Jones. She is the head of global faith-based partnerships at Facebook, where she leads the company's work with faith-based organizations around the world. She is the author of a dynamic book, Success from the Inside Out, which chronicles her unlikely story of success after a childhood filled with physical and sexual abuse. And she also hosts Undefeated with Nona Jones, a Facebook Live talk show that reaches almost 40 million people around the world each week. And of course, you are a wife, you are a mom, and you are an inspiration to many. You are an inspiration to many. And we'll talk about the book in a few moments because I want to make sure that we get to that because uh, the story is just incredible, Nona. Incredible. And I just want to thank the Lord for you in advance, even before we get into anything else, that the Lord brought you through and where you are is just incredible. We all have stories, but we are not all willing to share our stories. And so
Amen.
thank you for your courage in doing that. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But I want you to tell us a little bit about you. You have just such an incredible journey that you have taken to get you to this point. But what do you want to share and let our listeners know about Nona Jones?
Well, I get asked often to describe myself, and there's really only four words that I think are the most accurate description, and that is there's really five words. I'm a statistically improbable product of grace.
Mm, those are good
um,
words.
at the end of the day, when I look at my biography, I look at the profile that I have, considering what I went through as a child. I should either be in jail or dead. And there are girls in the juvenile justice system, women in the criminal justice system, who have went through similar things, except for the grace of God, there go I.
Mm,
So I always like to start there because that's honestly that's who I am, and I never lose sight of that. I truly believe that everything I am, everything I have, is a gift from the hand of God. So as you said, I'm a wife, I'm a mom. I get to do some really exciting work in the tech
yeah,
sector,
yeah.
and also I love to preach and teach the Word of God. I'm living in my passion right now. I love to equip people to unleash their potential and their purpose in the world.
And that's one of the things. Thank you. One of the things I want to say from the beginning is to emphasize to those that are listening, our audience that listens to Church Unfiltered, as pastors, ministry leaders. I just want to say to these pastors, this is a preacher. We're talking to a preacher. We're going to talk about some Facebook things and everything, but I know her from preaching. I know her from hearing her preach. That was the first thing, or present. And she was on stage with Furtick and Carrie Newhoff and all these different names, and she totally stood out. And I haven't told you this, but I was in the audience, and people like, oh my goodness, who was that?
Oh wow!
Oh, who was that?
Oh
And that was
wow!
a couple of years ago now, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's just been a meteoric rise, and we just thank God for what has happened and how you have influenced so many. But again, to the listeners, this is a preacher. So if you have an event or something coming up, make sure you contact Nona Jones.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, I'm gonna sing your praises. You're dynamic woman of God, and we thank God for you.
Praise God.
So in the scriptures, it talks about the sons of Issachar. The sons of Issachar knew the times. They were aware of the times. They were able to discern what was happening all around Israel, the children of Israel at that time. And but it says something at the end of that verse or that passage when it makes reference to the sons of Issachar. They understood the times and they knew what to do about it. And I think a lot of times we make reference to that verse and we say that people they understood the time, but they also knew what to do. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on the show. I have so many pastor friends. We have clients through our consulting business who are asking the question, what do we do? We have Facebook now, or we're looking at Facebook, or we're on there now, but what do we do? And I know that we don't have a whole lot of answers in this pandemic season, but we have some answers. And so I wanted to make sure that I brought you on. We wanted to hear it directly from someone who is connected, someone who is in the heart of working with digital media and ministry, and for you to share with us, how do we not only understand the times, but then what do we do?
Yeah.
And so that's really one of the things that came to my mind when I was like, I need to get Nona on here.
Well, so I've been at Facebook for almost 3 years now. And before I was asked to come to Facebook, I didn't work in tech or social media. I didn't have like this vast background in church communications, none of that. But I've been in ministry since I was 17. And it just so happened that an executive at Facebook and I did a leadership program together. Okay. And I used to joke with him when we were in the leadership program. I said, Facebook needs to create a foundation and I want to be the president of it, but it has to be based in Gainesville, Florida, because I can't move because we have a church there. And so he would always laugh and say, well, that will never happen, but that's very funny. And so when Mark changed the mission of the company to focus on community building back in 2017, there was some research that was done to try to understand what are all of the different types of communities that exist. And when the study came back, what they found is that the largest community that was the most meaningful to the people who were in them were communities of faith, which was surprising to Mark, who is kind of an agnostic. He was an atheist at one point. Now he's more an agnostic. And he has even gone on record as saying he does believe that there's a higher power. And so he was surprised by that because that didn't really match his lived existence. But he determined that if that was true and the company wanted to be a place where community happened, then the company needed to focus on faith. And so long story short, I was asked to join the company to help build this strategy, to help build this approach. And when I accepted the role, the way it was framed to me was really about just helping communities of faith better use Facebook. Well, my understanding of how Facebook has been used traditionally is for marketing. People use Facebook to, tell more people about their events, try to get more people to their building, which actually, when I talked to some of the leading churches in the country when I first started, That's exactly what they said. But in my mind, because I am in ministry, because my husband and I pastor a local church together, I was curious to see, well, how do you go beyond marketing to ministry?
Okay.
How do you use this vast network with more than 3 billion users to build God's kingdom?
Right.
And so that's when I started to really study discipleship. To study what was biblical discipleship. What did Jesus have in mind in Matthew 28:19 when he actually called us out to teach people to obey everything that he commanded? Like, what was in his mind and how did he model that? And what I saw in his example was that discipleship happened in relationship. It was something that required people to connect with each other, to challenge each other to mature in their faith together. And as I thought about that, I realized that Facebook, in many ways, was doing exactly that. But most churches weren't using Facebook for that purpose. So that's when I set out to try to give people a framework for digital discipleship, using Facebook as the platform in order to help people mature in their faith relationally. And so for me, that's really kind of been the missing link is, all right, we know that attendance, in-person attendance in churches, not just here in the US, but all around the world, attendance has been declining for decades. It's been on a downward trajectory. But yet usage of social technology has been increasing.
Okay.
So I think that for those who are now finding themselves, in the middle of this pandemic saying, I don't know what to do. Well, God is a God of provision. He already provided the tools. He already provided the platform. And so now the work I'm doing is really to help people use the platform for those purposes.
All right. Okay. So if I'm a pastor and the pandemic has either just propelled me into using Facebook, or maybe I had some familiarity with it, basic familiarity. I had a page, maybe personally. Walk me through this. Walk me through this as what do I do with Facebook, especially now and even into post-pandemic season? What do I do with Facebook?
Sure. So think of your Facebook presence like a house, where your page is your front porch. It's the public, it's basically the public representation of you and your church. Anybody can drive down any street and see a front porch. But Facebook Live is like your front door. It's the thing that you open so that people can actually speak to you. You can speak to them. It becomes that kind of first point of interaction. But if you don't have anything beyond a porch and a door, all you'll essentially have is a Hollywood set. It's just a facade. So you need to have a space that when people go through that open door, they can connect with each other and have conversations. And that becomes your Facebook group. It's like your living room. It's essentially like your online church campus, because that becomes the place where people can have conversations. They can get to know each other. You can discover common interests, things that you wouldn't normally do on a page, because a page is public. I mean, you don't see people giving their life to Jesus on just random front porches, but it does happen in living rooms because that's where people feel safe to be vulnerable. And then within groups, you have a tool called social learning units, which is something that I've been just heavily advocating, because units really becomes your like almost like your online classroom. It allows you to have structured conversations with people. So to give you an example, so you can have learning units that you build around the basics of the faith. Prayer 101, fasting 101. Something my husband and I do is if he preached or if I preached, we'll just break our message down into 3 or 4 parts, and we'll create learning units so that people can actually dig into the concepts that we shared and have conversations about them. So if you're just getting started, just those 4 tools alone, pages, live groups, and social learning units become kind of foundational to building an online house of worship.
Okay. And that's awesome. I think that even when I'm thinking of what you just said and what I use, what our church uses, we probably use 2 of those things.
Right. Most churches do.
Okay. What I know why we don't. What have you heard? What is the reason why most churches or pastors aren't even aware of those four components?
It's primarily because of the paradigm of church. So this has really been my mission over the last few years. It continues to be my mission, which is changing the definition of what church is, because we typically think of church as being a place that we go and or a program that we participate in. We think of it episodically. And because we think of it that way, most churches primarily are using Pages and Live
Right.
because the page is the place where we share the events that we want you to come to. And the page is the place where we go live so you can, watch the program or watch the service. So it's not unique. That's just kind of how we tend to think of church. And even before I started to really build a digital discipleship approach or strategy, even our own church, that's what we have done. We have, groups and social learning and this and all of that now, but that's because in our mind, that's what church is. And so you try to replicate what you think church is on social technology. The thing I would say, which is so interesting about what has happened with COVID-19, is I think now church leaders realize that, church is not just a program. It's not just a thing that you go to. Church is actually a community of people who gather together and who are following Jesus together. So in many ways, I think COVID-19 is not as much a disruptor as it is returning us back to what church was always meant to be. Many people have said, oh, it's a disruptor, it's changed everything. And I think not really. I think it's just returned us back to the original intention of what church always was. It was never meant to be a place or a program. And Jesus, I always say, I don't see any examples of Jesus saying, hey, I've got this great parable I want to share. Come see me at the temple this weekend. Like he didn't do that, right? Jesus was constantly among the people, teaching them, encouraging them, healing them. And I think that's exactly the model that church is meant to be.
Okay. Recently, I know that I've had some dialogue with pastors. There's this concept that came out of the business world called of innovative disruption. And really that's how I look at it. It is something that can take it, that we can take and we can go back to some of the basic things that we should have been doing anyway, which I happen to think that may be one of the reasons why we don't use Facebook the way that it is designed, or where we can use it, because discipleship, as you mentioned, discipleship hasn't been the highest priority.
Yeah.
Or we don't understand exactly how to do it. We're really good at weekend services. Most churches that I come into contact, we're really good at weekend services, but discipleship is a little different. That's a little different.
Well, and it's interesting because discipleship was always the point,
Exactly.
Right. Jesus never said, all right, go ye therefore into all the nations and bring everybody into a building.
Right.
And when they get there, preach them under the pews. Like he didn't say that. But I think what has happened, and I think if we're honest, I've personally done some introspection, I think as a preacher myself, it's like, you know what? It's gratifying to have people come to hear you teach. Like that's gratifying. Right. It's gratifying to look out into an auditorium and see the chairs filled. But that's not church, and I think that's where we kind of lost sight. I've even had people tell me things during this season where we're, not meeting in buildings. People have said, well, once we can go back to church, then things will be better. And I was just like, so what are you doing now? Because church was never a building. It was always a people. It was always meant to be a community of people.
Let me ask you about a couple of things that I've seen on Facebook recently. I've seen rooms. I'm not familiar. Yes. What is that? What is rooms?
So it allows you to essentially create community through video. So video chats, and they're built into different surfaces. So you can create a room for whatever your purpose is, and you can actually schedule a video chat discussion or meeting or event right there within Facebook.
Got it. I saw you posted something one day or earlier on in the pandemic. I think it was a lot of people who were thinking that Facebook was shutting us down.
Right.
It was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's too. The church is on Facebook now, and they're shutting us down.
Yeah.
And I saw that you posted a response to that. Please, can you help us to understand if that happens at
Yeah.
all? If it's possible for that to happen? If it is too many of us on there, or we have too many people who want to know about Jesus, and Facebook is going to shut us down. Is
Definitely not. So,
okay.
yes, I had a situation early on, as you said, where I started getting all these panicked texts and calls, and people said, we can't access our videos. Facebook is shutting down churches, and Facebook is silencing the church, and Facebook's attacking the church. I was like, what? And it was like really, really late at night. And so I reached out to some of my colleagues, and I just said, and what was amazing was it had like that narrative had picked up so much steam
Yes,
that I was getting contacted by the media.
it
People
was
were like, what is
everywhere.
going on Facebook? And so I reached out to my engineer colleagues, and they were just like, hey, we had a system-wide bug where all video content disappeared, and we're going to be restoring it. It should be back up within the next few minutes.
Mhm.
But people immediately jumped to Facebook is targeting the church. That wasn't the case at all.
Okay.
It's a technology platform. And what that means is there are going to be bugs, there are going to be issues. Yes, it's frustrating, but that's life. I mean, if you think
Right.
about it, we all have hiccups,
Right.
even when we meet in person. Somebody was supposed
Absolutely.
to do something on the program, they didn't show up.
Right.
Or, we just have all types of things happen. So that's what it is. There is
Okay.
absolutely no concerted effort to silence the church. I'm at Facebook not in spite of my faith, but because of my faith. That's why I'm there.
That's good.
So please
That's
know
good.
that is not that is not the case.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Because yes, it did spread quite quickly.
Yes, it
I know
did.
we don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to ask you, what have you seen? You talk to so many different folks across the country, across the world, even before you were like us, required to quarantine and come inside the house and all of that. What are you seeing? What are some trends that you are seeing, both positive and concerning? What are some trends that you are seeing in church in general? Because you are a pastor, you are a preacher, but then also tied into what you do digitally and all that. What are some trends that you are seeing across the world?
Well, one trend I've seen that I mean, it's not concerning, but it's definitely something to keep in mind is just that people have essentially been trying to replicate what they've been doing offline online. So it's kind of like, hey, we did, 5 services on the weekend, so we're going to show the service 5 times over the weekend. And that's kind of been the extent of it. Whereas if you think about it, there's actually 168 hours in the week.
Yeah,
So you don't have to actually concentrate all of your time and energy and effort into the weekend because you're no longer constrained by a date, a time, or location.
right.
So what I've been trying to advise leaders to do is literally think outside of the box. You are
Mhm.
no longer in the box of the building. So what else can you be doing during the week? What are other ways that you can connect with people, that you can encourage people during the week that you may not have done before because it required an event to take place? So that's just one thing I've seen pretty consistently. And I would also offer that I think this is the time, if ever there was one, this is the time for leaders to be on social technology. There have
Yes.
been so
Yeah.
many people who have said, I don't use that Facebook thing. I don't use that Instagram thing. And it's like, well, let me ask you a question. If you knew that 80% of the people in your city lived on one specific side of town, would you not have a location there? Most people say, of course I would. Well, that's the exact same analogy to the digital space because
That's
almost
good.
80% of the US is on Facebook and
That's
using it
good.
regularly. So
Yes.
that's just a couple thoughts I would add because I've seen that pretty consistently.
That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. And I can't even count how many people have prayerfully now made the transition. But prior to COVID-19, they swore off Facebook and Instagram and
Yeah.
anything related to it. But now they are trying, and And it's been pretty encouraging to see some of the pastors and friends that I have, and
Yeah.
they're doing it, and they sometimes go live and don't realize that they're live, but that's okay.
Right. No, that's been funny. The funniest one is so older people, they don't really know where the camera is. So a lot of times they'll just be like
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
you're like, back up. Your nose is in the camera.
Yeah, I've seen that quite a few times.
Yes. It's great.
As we prepare to wrap up, I want to switch gears. I want you, and I would love for you maybe one day to come back and talk about it specifically, because this has blessed so many people. Your book, your story. I just want you to just share just kind of synopsis of your book and what your ministry is tied into your story and everything. I want you to share about Success from the Inside Out is the name of the book.
Thank you. Well, yeah, Success from the Inside Out, it's my memoir. I mentioned at the very beginning that I'm a statistically improbable product of grace. I grew up in a very dysfunctional situation, experienced abuse of every type. My father passed away shortly before my second birthday, and I was raised by a mother who had mental illness and allowed her boyfriend to abuse me while she was also abusive as well. And so when you look at my background, it's really difficult to explain how I ended up where I am today outside of the miraculous grace of God. And so that's essentially my story. And I talk about how I've been very, very blessed in my career, in ministry, and I achieved success at a pretty early age and a steady trajectory of success after that. But because of the trauma of my past, I was never really able to experience the joy and the contentment that should come with success. And I learned through my own time with God and really seeking his face and really trying to understand what was happening within me, I learned that you can essentially have all the trappings of success in the world, but just be trapped in your success.
Wow.
So the book is really about building success that starts within. By understanding who you were created to be in God, by having an identity that's rooted in his word, by not comparing your purpose to other people's, which can often rob us of the joy of what God has placed in us. And I have principles in there, just some leadership and business and success principles that I've gleaned over my career for the ultimate goal of really just helping people build a success that fills versus a success that empties. So that's my hope. That's my desire. It came out in January, and people have been saying they've been so blessed, which is a blessing to me because I feel like that's my ministry.
Yes. Yeah, it is truly a remarkable book. And I thank God for it. You say something in here, and I was thinking about just overall what we were going to talk about, the church, where we are with different things and individuals, myself, my family, ministers that I know, friends that I have. And there's something that you say near the beginning of it. You said the most difficult work we have to do is in ourselves.
Yeah. It's the most difficult work because, it's easy to see the frailties and the deficiencies of other people. But what we don't realize is what we see in others is filtered through the lens that we bring to the situation.
Absolutely.
And that lens is a reflection of our heart. So until we can have the humility to say, wait a minute, they very well may be wrong, completely, totally, absolutely wrong. But there are parts of us that are broken that we bring into every situation that we have to be healed from. So that was a huge insight for me across my life.
Well, again, yes, it's pretty good in more than one way. It challenged me, and I'm just going to be honest with you, Nona. It challenged me, even as I work with other leaders. It challenged me to look at some things differently, even my own personal life. And so I want to say just a testimony to you directly that you challenged me in ways that I didn't expect. I was reading it. I'm like, okay, I know Nona, I'm a supporter. And I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. Like, wait, I start clutching my shirt. Like, wait a minute, what's going on? What's happening right now?
That's a blessing. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. I mean, I wrote the book honestly just to give glory to God and to pass along whatever I've learned. It's a journey though. Healing is a journey. Like it's not a destination. So it's a process and it's a journey that I'm on myself.
The last thing I will ask you, you are very open about the things that happen to you. You give a disclaimer at the beginning, like, hey, if you if this
Right.
is too much, share with us how you got there, how you got the courage basically to share everything that happened to you like that. I mean, because there may be someone that's listening and maybe they're contemplating writing a book, a pastor, or wants to share some things, but a lot of times we're a little hesitant to share things because we don't want people to see what's really going on or what's happened to us in the past, and because we don't want people to think that we're a certain way or we think a certain way or we can't handle things. So I know that there's a lot of hesitation oftentimes when I talk to people who want to share their story or want to be able to say certain things, but they are hesitant to do that. How did you get there? How did you get to the point where you were able to share your story like that?
I it's something I talk about in the book because I ended up sharing my story almost accidentally in college. I had a roommate, but a very traumatic experience happened to her, and in my attempts to comfort and console her, I mentioned what happened to me, and she said, "Oh," and what I said was essentially, I understand how you feel, and I'm so sorry this happened. And she said, "How could you possibly understand?" And so that's when I told her my story. And as I was telling her my story, it was like the spirit in the room changed, and
Mhm.
she became more open. And I think that was the indicator to me that there's power in vulnerability. There's
Yes.
power in
Yes, it
transparency.
is.
And so I started to share my story more after that. And I've shared it, I don't know how many times now. And it's amazing to me because every single time I share it, doesn't matter if I'm in a crowd of CEOs addressing, leadership and I share my story, or if I'm talking about, community building or preaching, there's always somebody who comes up to me and they say the same thing happened to me and I've never told anybody.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
that's really what gives me and I won't even say courage, because the way that I define courage is courage people think is the absence of fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's fear in the forward direction. There are still parts of me that are fearful, but I don't allow that to keep me from moving forward. So yeah, that's why I see how people need to know that they're not alone. And
That's
that's what
good.
keeps me doing it.
That's good. I told you all she is a preacher. She is a preacher. Please, Nona, tell us, how do we keep in contact with you or know what's happening with you? Tell us about how to follow you and find out what's happening with your ministry.
Sure. So you can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. Same handle. It's at Nona Not Nora across all platforms. Nona Not Nora. You can also connect with me through my website. It's just nonajones.com. I have you mentioned at the beginning, I have a Facebook Live talk show every week, every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Talking to somebody who is well known and admired about their story of overcoming dysfunction and trauma and discouragement. That's every Thursday. It's called Undefeated, and it's also a podcast. So you can subscribe to that podcast. New episode comes out every Friday. But yeah, you can connect with me on all those different platforms.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nona. It has been a blessing, and I know that this will be a help to many pastors and people in general. And we want to, of course, again, encourage you to order her book, Success from the Inside Out. It's available everywhere, right?
Yes,
Everywhere.
everywhere.
It's
Mm-hmm.
available everywhere.
And just so everyone knows, I have a second book coming out June 23rd called From Social Media to Social Ministry.
Oh,
You can
okay.
pre-order it now on all platforms. So yeah, it goes deeper into what I shared earlier. But yeah, feel free to order it.
Okay, sounds good. I'll order that immediately. Well,
Awesome.
thank you again, and please be safe and tell your husband I said hello. And we have to get you all to San Antonio, and definitely when everything clears up, everything is good to go. We want to make sure that we get you back. And again, to those who are listening, our church has had her come and be a blessing to our women. She and they keep asking to bring her back. So
Aw.
please make sure that you see about her in reference to preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, as well as all the other things that she does as well. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for helping us to understand. I'm going to get off of this broadcast, and I'm going to go onto Facebook, our church's Facebook page, and we're going to do everything that you just said so that we could get up to speed. Thank you so much, Nona. Thank you for blessing us on today.
Thank you for having me. This was such a pleasure and a blessing. I appreciate you.
All right. God bless. Take care.
God bless. You too.